let's get started. We have Katie and Shane this time. So, Katie, would you like to share your story and introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. So I'm Katie. I'm currently a UX designer in Amazon Prime, and I'm working on building a design system uphill battle. I've been in the industry, specifically in design systems, for the last 5 years. My humble beginnings were in production design, and fun fact, I started off my career making junk mail, like printed junk mail. So if you ever got any like AT&T postcards or like Hyatt postcards, you are most welcome. And I'll just follow up with a question that everybody asks me. No, I do not get Prime for free.
I wish because on LinkedIn, for example, if you are working with a LinkedIn company, they are not only getting pro accounts for free, but they also have 3 invites pro accounts to share with their friends. You need
No,
to have
no, the
friends
only
in
thing,
LinkedIn.
yeah, seriously, the only thing I get for free is more meeting invites.
Shane, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Shane, and I've been in the design space for close to 25 years now. Um, I also run the Design Systems Collective, which is a community space where we source articles from community contributors from all over the world. And I work at Corporate Investment Bank, and we are building a new design system there from the ground up.
Love it. Let me share a link here in our feature file. So this is another really good community, so please join that. Shane, thank you
Thanks.
very much for contributing to the community and sharing and making it open for others as well. Katie, would you like to kick things off and share what are the top 3 things that you really admire about Dropbox design system?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, it's absolutely beautiful, right? This is every visual designer's dream is to work on something that just looks like this. I found it really interesting that they have a whole entire section on motion, which we're seeing a lot more and more in the industry. So it's a really cool space to be in, and it's been really interesting to see how it gets applied to a product to inspire delight. Motion is really there to make us happy and be like, ooh, shiny, pretty, because we're all kind of like crows, right? We have like shiny, pretty things. The second part that I'm sure we're going to talk about is their typography. Now, it's so dynamic. You have high level of interactivity, especially when you get to more towards the bottom and you get to use like their little AI, yeah, randomized AI, and it does all of this dynamic text. Cool. I had a ton of questions as somebody who sits more on like the production realm. I had a ton of questions on how this all works. I think those are like my top two biggest ahas. Oh, very cool, but also I have a lot of questions.
Shane, what are your top highlights of framework design system from Dropbox?
Well, I think Katie covered a lot of similar sentiments. I mean, this is pure eye candy.
Sorry.
It's really beautiful. No, same thing. Motion was interesting to see. I suppose the thing that's also great to see in this is the voice and tone section. And I noticed when you start like right at the beginning of and you load the site, it talks about this being like the brand identity kind of thing. The identity comes through nicely here, how this applies to quite a wide range of products, product design, web design, marketing, but it really sets the tone for the brand. And that's really what I picked up from here. It's very much uh, the personality of what the brand should look and feel like really comes through nicely on this site.
Love it. Yeah, like it's really fascinating that they zoomed out a little bit from the digital experience and they also focused on the marketing, having marketing also as a part of the design system guidelines. They have the website and product and marketing, so all in one platform. Do you have any other interesting examples of design systems who are heavily invested in the marketing? Because if we will take a look into like IBM Carbon Design System or GitHub Primer Design System, they don't talk a lot about the marketing, but the Dropbox heavily invested into that area. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have any other good examples how marketing is well captured within the design system?
I don't really know of anything public that focuses a lot on marketing specifically. So there may be product-based websites that pull from the product sort of design
Hmm.
system component libraries. It's hard to say. I haven't necessarily seen a public design system that focuses purely on marketing, at least that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of any of the major products that would have something that's quite the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you see there may be used in marketing, but it's not specific to marketing itself, like and those type of things. But I haven't seen anything very specific to marketing.
Yeah. We've done Wise Design System Inspect and Reflect. There are some interesting thoughts on the way how marketing is also being a part of the design system, where they have this product and they have editorial. And editorial is coming from more like a similar to the way how they have here. Let me just go scroll down here. Similar way how they are separating product through and the website. The same way Wise Design System is separating product, and they call instead of website they call it editorial. So this is all like building blocks for the landing pages that they have that empowers marketing teams to create those kind of marketing materials much more faster and easier. And they also have a couple resources. They had some really good things related to the marketing as well. So my question is, do you see this emerging pattern, behavior, trend that is happening on the market where design system is expanding and we are not only focusing on the designers and engineers, but we're also thinking about, of course, also content, but we're also thinking about the marketing teams being a part of it. Do you see that as an interesting opportunity where we could also have marketing teams being a part of the design system, or it's too much?
I think it depends a lot on what your marketers are actually marketing towards and the platforms and just the size of your company. So for instance, I'm going to just use the example that I'm in all day is we have content marketing inside of Amazon, and their uses and their requirements are pretty different. And it's complex because by the time they have like the tools and all of their functional requirements, there's not a whole lot left for design, like actual visual configurations, right? But for internal folks, for internal marketing teams that build assets in-house, there's a lot of opportunity, right, for them to leverage something like this.
Mhm.
So I think it heavily depends on what your marketing teams are doing and like how closely do you want your product and your marketing teams to be representing the same thing.
Mhm. So, Shane, you have some background in marketing. Like, what are your thoughts on like marketing teams? They all have DAM systems, right? Digital asset management, where they are storing all their campaign materials, all their media files, and design system on the other side also has some overlaps there with, for example, when it comes to media, here if we will go into the iconography, they have UI icons that of course is a part of the design system. Pictograms that might be somewhere in the middle. And they call it spot, but I guess this is the media files that they are creating when it comes to the marketing. So do you see some overlap with DAM systems like digital asset management systems and design systems?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think the real overlap comes in that digital space when it comes to like marketing websites. Often there's shared components and elements. In the market teams I've worked with, they very much pull a lot from the brand guidelines and those systems. But then where there's, like I said, the marketing websites, there's often the shared world. I think there's a big overlap.
Do you believe in the future there will be like there like getting started section in the design system where they have four designers, four engineers, and then like four marketing teams or something like that? Do you see this is like the right trajectory for the design system, or it's like we're completely going off the rails here? And if someone will think about, oh, in my organization we actually have product teams, right? but the marketing team is like completely different and we are not talking to each other. And the purpose of design system was originally to connect designers and engineers. Maybe it's time to connect also the marketing teams. How to envision this kind of future collaboration if we will try to like brainstorm and think about how this future collaboration might look like?
Well, I see it all as part of the same thing, just different sort of disciplines that utilize it. I mean, if I think of design systems traditionally, those were all in the branding space in print media. So when I think of design systems, I think of it quite holistically. So in my view, marketing and product design and branding should all live together in the same space, even if it's just as where there's shared assets, but also have design central, so everyone can see what everyone else is doing. So I definitely think marketing should be part of the broader sort of design system. Maybe there are specific disciplines that will pull different elements from it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that's the goal for me in my current position. That's definitely a goal, is being able to integrate a marketing page. But Shane, exactly what you said, the disciplines are different. So it's nice to have everything all in one place, product engineering, marketing.
Mhm.
And I like that because it does encapsulate all the different facets that a design system can actually touch. It doesn't have to just be isolated to product. It's nice that a consumer could go to a specific place and be like, oh, look, this has been accounted for. This is something that is acknowledged. But to what Shane said, the artifacts are going to be different.
Love it, love it. Yeah. Great. So when it comes to actual components of the design system, and maybe they didn't want to call it as a design system, right? They don't have any section related to the building blocks, the components itself. What are your thoughts on that? Within the framework, if we will scroll down a little bit, they have couple guidelines. For example, what kind of scenarios, where and how CTA buttons should be applied. This is mostly focused on the UX copywriting, content strategy, rather than actual components. So why do you think they didn't share components? Maybe they have their own private library, and for the public one, they just decided to focus on the branding. And maybe if you could apply the same case to your organization, maybe like the marketing team was the one who funded this initiative, and they didn't want to maybe not exactly collaborate, but like maybe they missed this opportunity to have product designers being a part of that as well and have design system, or maybe it was too expensive for them to implement. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this
I
is
have
very
lots of
much,
feels.
yeah,
You go first. I have lots of feels.
yeah. I think in this particular case, this is very much just the branding language versus anything else. I'm pretty sure they must have a much deeper sort of product library. It's just not publicly exposed. I don't know if that's necessarily a missed opportunity, but it's more, what do we want to put in the public domain? I think this is very much a big marketing push, from a branding perspective. But yeah, where the components come in here, that may be a deeper design system that sits on the product side. We just don't see it here.
I actually am thinking that maybe that was intentional. We'll get into it a little bit later, but as we discover all the different product lines that they have within, it actually might not be in a place strategically to try to put componentry and building blocks in the way that we're used to seeing them on a branding design system. So there's different kinds of design systems that exist, and this one's very much a branding and marketing focused one that talks about, the visual expression and how we represent ourselves from a visual and surprise and delight way. But to what Shane said, they probably have a ton of different repos and they're probably not succinct. So, like, nobody wants to see your messy closet. So, we're just going to close the closet and make it look good.
Yeah. And I think that this particular system, what we see here, is very much the foundation. It's the building blocks that all the other, where there's multiple design systems in play, they would all start from here. So I think that's very much what this is. It's the starting place for everything else.
At least that's the goal.
Yes, I'd imagine that's the goal.
Love it, love it. Let's dive deeper into the inspect and reflect, where we are trying to reverse engineer the design decisions that they've made across the design system and also talk about the main challenges that design system folks are facing. And just think about hypothetical scenarios. Let's imagine that we are working on the Dropbox within the Dropbox company and we need to create a design system. So I'll be asking a lot of these hypothetical scenarios. Again, shining a line behind the scenes, how if someone who's listening us, they have the same challenge or issue, they could understand how the experts will solve this specific challenge. Let's start with the product pages. I just imported all the product pages. So you will able to see all the screenshots right here, different product lines. I didn't know that they have so many products. It's actually, they also have things similar to, hard to explain. I guess this is mostly like Google Workspaces or Microsoft Office. The second one is Dropbox Replay, something similar to Loom. Dropbox DocSend, something similar to DocuSign. And Dropbox Sign, I guess this is more similar to the DocuSign. And DocSend is mostly for sharing all the documents and have this like digital documents platform all in one place. So if we will take a look into all those product pages, right? Do you see any interesting highlights here? So there are some deviations happening on each product line. So let's talk about this scenario, right? You are working with the Dropbox and you see all these product lines that we would like to unify or make them more consistent. What will be your first steps? Like, how would you find the designers or engineers or the tech leads or product managers who are working on those different product lines and you will start working on building relationships with them? Or will you do the inventory on your side, find some learnings and share the report with them? Like, how will you solve this problem when, for example, Dropbox is a little bit deviated from Dropbox DocSend?
Shane, I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think there's a two-pronged approach. I would start with the product owners initially. That's where I would start the conversations. Having that reference of how things are showing up in these different platforms as something to point to. I think there may just be areas that are less aware of the design system space and what's available there. Or there's a potential that they're just much older platforms that it's just not viable to update them to the latest system. But I would start with the product owners and speak to them. That would be my starting point. I don't know, Katie,
I would
what would you
agree.
do?
Probably honestly do an audit myself, right? Just do a big old fig jam file of audit and just taking all of the different screenshots, finding the person of contact, like you said, and getting feedback based off of what my initial collection would start to show through. One of the rubrics that I really love practicing a lot, and it's really good for me as like a visual tech person, is the rubric that he has all, most, some, and few, right? And we're taking common componentry like a side rail or a navigation and investigating what that looks like. I personally like to come to product owners with visuals because a lot of times I think the translation between what I'm saying and what they're thinking and what they're saying and what I'm thinking is somewhat misaligned because the word component is a catch-all, right? 'Cause anything can be a component. So for me, as someone who sits in the design space, I would probably run my own visual design audit and collect that and then start to talk to the product owners with exactly what you were saying, Shane, right? Because we run into the issue of we obtained this product, we inherited it, and its tech stack is actually super, super old, and we can't refactor it in the way that we want to, or we can't seamlessly change over the code. I'm a big believer in understanding the more technical constraints to better carve out a path forward.
Yeah, I think that's an important one. It's the tech behind it that is often the constraint. At least that's what I've seen. So having that good understanding of tech is important, I think. But also for me, visual audits, something to point to, really takes it out of the hypothetical to something more tangible that you can look and feel and speak to.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
Especially for stakeholders who aren't designers. There are some product owners who are very design savvy, right? So like you could speak to them in design language and they'd totally get it. While there's A very good handful who are like, eh, what? I don't.
And I believe one of the core drivers here for design system adoption might be also the fact that the accessibility, right? So talking about the compliance and making sure that people are like the products that we are creating are compliant. So let me dive deeper into the Dropbox design system. And I've done some tagging here and I've started with the sidebars. And when it comes to sidebars, they actually have multiple of them across different product lines. So this is the first one coming from the Dropbox homepage. There is another one coming from the papers. And as you can see here, the layout is a little bit different. And the docs and others have also some deviations. So let me just quickly import everything into our board and we'll love to hear your thoughts. Again, hypothetical scenario, right? Let's imagine that we started with these sidebars and we see that. What would be our next steps? Like, how would you tell the story that, okay, when it comes to the sidebars, and again, let's imagine that the technical stack is all the same, right? We are all using React, everything is great. We just need to find a way how to unify those experiences. So, what will be your first steps here?
Shane, what do you think? I was thinking taxonomy, right?
Yeah.
So, like, we're looking at the taxonomy and the structure of this. Let's take a second to talk about that. They're all over the place and they're pretty inconsistent. Outside of any of the styling attributes, side rails in any kind of navigation. I strongly believe they need to have a very strong point of view on the taxonomy and how things are ordered and nesting and what is considered nested and what is not. And that can be respective of each one of the product lines, but at least the structure, the higher top level structure is the same.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Also, yeah, these layout patterns are not, but the layout, the patterns, and if those are little drop down arrows versus the one on the very far right, which is, that the arrows on the very right hand side. So they don't seem to be a consistent sort of pattern that they're following. So I think a big part of that is like, what is that standard we need to follow? I'm assuming this is light and dark mode. There also seems to be like an inconsistent use of how they use iconography. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think there's a lot to be done as far as unifying the look and feel across all of these and the way they operate. They don't really feel like they belong in the same family.
No, not at all.
This
I
is
think
a
there's an
really hard
area of
thing.
opportunity.
Please, get
Oh,
yeah.
I was gonna say, when we're looking at stuff like this, it's always so interesting to hear other people's point of views on where do they start and how do they take a sequential, almost like a Russian nesting doll of you start with this thing and you build up to the next, and what does that sequence look like? Because I instantly went to the taxonomy, and I think it's interesting that Shane went towards the visual styles and how we're leveraging iconography, type, gap spacing, padding, and those are all interconnected in such an intimate way.
I don't think there's a strict rule. It's just what works for you, and I suppose the teams you're working with. There's just an approach that you can take. You define it for
Just
yourself.
go,
Just go for it
just
and
do
start
it,
somewhere. You know,
do it like Nike.
yes. You know, like how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Just start eating.
That's a really good
I
point.
mean, yes, it's like, how do you eat a peep?
So during our previous sessions, one of the interesting strategy, maybe that easier to implement, is actually starting with design tokens. But the value that we are getting out of it is not like tremendous, right? This is like a huge amount of investment that is required to make this kind of tokens being applied and also being used across multiple products. Katie, but you raised a really good point. Maybe starting with content, right? The copywriting with the taxonomy itself, with maybe some patterns, at least from like product experience perspective, where we could explain to the team that, okay, like first thing, let's make sure that every item on the sidebar should have, for example, selected element that will represent the current page. For example, here's the way how they are doing that with some dark background. Here they just make the font darker, But like when it comes to the taxonomy, right? Like how would you start? Would you think about the ways how we could talk about, okay, here's the navigation section, here's the CTA section. For example, on the hello sign, they have signed documents, a CTA button on the top, where for the Dropbox page itself, it's not a CTA, but it's like mostly like a secondary button, like to add new sections at the bottom.
That's a hard one. I need to know all of the things about the history and why this was born this way. So that from a top level, I think taxonomy can start off with like very simple elements of does every side rail need to have some kind of header, right? Because like I noticed for folders that has a header, but then none of the others do. And maybe they don't need them, but
Mhm.
is there areas of opportunity to unify what that distinct pattern looks like and the order of things? I know that they serve different purposes, and maybe that's something that's defined in the taxonomy of these different rails is that, hey, this one is different because it has a very distinct purpose, and then getting that documented in a way. It doesn't necessarily have to be everything must look uniform, but there should be some strategy based off of product needs, functional requirements that are clumped together, right?
Yeah, I would pair that along with a bunch of principles. So it's very much principally led how you may have your structured, well-defined taxonomy, but principally now you can make your calls based on those principles. Like when do I include headers? When do I include icons? And if there's sort of guiding principles, then there's not necessarily a strict rule, but then there's enough flexibility but consistency, at least in the approach and when and how to use, how the taxonomy comes together.
Love it, love it. Yes. And Shane, speaking about the visual consistency, right? How would you start that? So would you try to go through all the products and just pick all the colors that they are using, maybe starting with colors or maybe starting with typography? How would you solve this problem?
It's a good question. I mean, I would start first look at the brand sort of colors and the tint stacks and everything they have there. Define what that is. I would also put principles in place of what is the foreground color, what is the background color, that sort of token architecture. And
Mhm.
then I would go and look at what exists and try to do a visual audit, if we're talking very visual application here, to see where those differences come in. And then looking at what we've set from the brand style guides and those principles of where and what colors apply to what, see how that would apply, say, into the sidebar example. So what is the right background color? I don't know, sizes, text sizes. I suppose that also depends on quite a few things. But I always start with the branding assets that exist already. That's usually where I start from, and then I draw my comparisons from there.
So when it comes to code or design, are there tools that helps you to quickly inventorize all the colors that are being used and then using some other tools where you could create a more balanced scale of colors?
I don't have any names off the top of my head. I know I've used tools and plugins. The names escape me completely.
But
I,
they
I sorry.
but they also have colors here, right? Maybe like starting from those colors might be a good foundation. And then trying to reverse engineer and go into the product's Figma files code and see, okay, is this enough? Are we capturing like 60% of the cases? If that's yes, that's great. This is a success, right? Would you start with that? Like maybe setting up the starting point and then getting feedback from other teams to say if it works or not?
Yeah, I mean, I always start with like what you see there. Those are the brand colors, and how many steps in that. And that's where I would start. And then look at the individual products and try to align from there. So I don't necessarily go and look and see what there is. I just look to see what it should be and where are we misaligned. I mean, if they are using a blue color, for example, and it doesn't match, we know what the standard should be. I don't know if I'm making sense, but that's where I always start, is start with the source of truth. And so whether that's inspecting code, speak to your developers, maybe they have CSS files, if there's tools that you can use to extract it, go for it.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. Likely, in my personal investigation that I've done, is just check to see if the colors that are being represented on the brand site actually have any kind of representative tokens. There's been many cases where a marketing site can move much faster than a product. So a marketing site can update the colors and say, look at all these pretty colors. This is how we use them. This is how we like to see them applied. This blue is our brand blue. And then you go to look at the code stack of the original token value from the main repo, and it's not the same hex value. So then, okay, there's that fundamental problem of misalignment of the tokens themselves. So if you can check all those prerequisite boxes, then absolutely, to what Shane said, is you need something to anchor you in your decisions. And if it's a brand site, that's the best. Go and trust that, because that's what's being publicly publicized on a public domain. That's what they have documented. And whether that's actually true or not, at least it's something.
Yeah, when it comes to web, if we could think about that, the web is the end product that end user sees. You can use Infinify AI Chrome extension. It lets you pull all the colors and other tokens, raw values from the style files that are being actually applied within the page. So that could be a good starting point. And when it comes to the components, so we spoke about the sidebars. How would you prioritize what kind of things to start with? Would you start, if we will take atomic design as a spectrum, would you start with like basic atoms, or would you focus more on the templates and maybe like pages? So what's your take on that? How to prioritize like this inventory during those kind of scenarios?
I think there's a two-pronged approach I would take. First is just those base level atomic values. What are the base token values that we want to align to? So I would start there, which is very much the micro sort of elements that built the building blocks. And then I would take a much broader look and look at the overall patterns that are established. Try to unify or have an approach to these patterns and layout patterns that get used. So I think that's where I would stop, those two kind of areas. It's a difficult question to answer though, but I think that's probably how I
There's,
would start.
I would do the same thing, Shane. Like I would 100% start with all of these like little smaller token values. If we think of the sequence of events, right? If you start fixing things at its core, sometimes the problem on the ripple effect will actually fix itself, right? And then from an infrastructure point, it's so much easier to get all of the token values and the coding frameworks all aligned so that when you make big batch updates, you can identify where the holes are and where things aren't matching, and you can get a lot done with a very small element. And like I said, who knows, if you fix one teeny tiny element, once it gets pushed into prod, it might actually fix or get closer to fixing other things, or it might break them, which is a different conversation.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe also we can start with the objectives, right? If the focus of this design system unification is making sure that we are compliant with accessibility standards, maybe that will be a good prioritization to start with the component families that are like very low on an accessibility scoring, right? So we can take a look into the search bars, for example. And I'm trying to dive deeper into the actual code that is being rendered on their product. I can see some interesting signals that they have some kind of unified class names. That's a signal that they have some kind of design system in place. How will Do you have any prioritization frameworks in mind how to prioritize which components we should work on first and do the audit first?
I think it's very, yeah, sorry. I think it's very like depends objectively what you're trying to achieve and
Mm-hmm.
objectively what's most important to you. I don't know if there is the right way to do it, more just what objectively, what are you trying to achieve and what's most important. If you're thinking, like you mentioned, accessibility, you have a very different approach. If you're thinking from an accessibility point of view, maybe you start at contrast, text sizes, those type of things, which wouldn't necessarily be a component level thing. So, but maybe if you're looking for consistency as a high priority, you may start to identify which components are most different from each other and maybe start there. So I think it's very much based on what your objective is that you're trying to achieve, which would guide where you would start. I don't know if there is the right place, more just objectively what you want to achieve and then look at it from that point of view.
I would have
Love
to
it.
agree with that. Uh, In my experience, I've started off with different aspects of every design system I've touched, and every aspect of that is different from the last because of the business objectives of or measuring or not what the overall business objective is for the design system and what kind of goal they're trying to accomplish and working backwards from what that looks like and uncovering holes. Um, Accessibility is, I personally love when there's an accessibility flaw because it's a Trojan horse to get a bunch of stuff fixed under the lens of like legal compliance, right? So from a point of view standpoint, I think that's it's almost an easy win. At least that's how I've leveraged it in the past of Trojan horsing specific UI updates and visual styling updates to meet accessibility under the lens of like legal compliance. Got to do it. It's the law. It's got to have it. But then there's also back to that rubric that Dan Mall has is the all, most, some, and few. And you can do that at the component level. You can do that at the token level. What is the smallest unit of measure that has the biggest impact?
Yeah, I think that's a great framework. Biggest impact, least effort, often will guide where you start.
Love it, love it. Great. And my last question here is for folks who are just starting, right? And again, we're trying to shine the line behind the scenes of how design system teams are thinking about those kind of challenges that others might face for the first time. If we will take a look into all the products that they have, the same how AI industry is moving, right? Nobody is trying to create foundational models. People are trying to use those models to create products, right? Maybe when it comes to design system, we also need to stop creating foundational design systems and just use the one that is available on the market, maybe from ShadCN or IBM, because they have a lot of good accessibility standards in place. They have token structure in place, and we don't need to start with buttons all the time. Maybe it will be better, and also for the stakeholders, if we will take a look into atomic design and starting from the end of the spectrum, like starting with the templates and pages, where we could start focusing on unifying the core value flows that we are creating as a product. So for example, in finance domain, the way how we are getting the debit card, if we could just take this flow and try to think about, okay, let's try to unify the experience instead of just buttons. What's your take on that? Should we all focus on the foundational design system and have full control of everything? Or it's better to focus on the templates and bigger chunks of our experiences? So what's your take on that?
These are spicy.
Yeah.
I asked this question a while back. I put a poll out to ask, and all the answers came back. They were quite different. At least this is what I've heard. If you're looking to get off the ground pretty quick, existing frameworks is probably a good option. But maybe a few years into that, 2-3 years down, you may start to find you pretty limited. And that's when you start hacking away at what you have and trying to create something more bespoke to your use case. So I think if you have the luxury to build the foundational stuff from start, that's probably the better way, and start simple with sort of the core elements. But I think it depends. Again, I don't think there is necessarily a right way. But if I look at some of the answers I got back from that question, lots of people were talking about typography and spacing and all those base elements were the right places to start. So That's before you jump to components. And then Dan Mull often says, like, build what is the biggest need first that most teams have, with a button, for example. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opinions about what's the right way and the wrong way. I suppose it depends objectively what you want to achieve and how much time you have to achieve it in.
Yep, it depends. Like at this point, I feel like I just need to get that tattooed above my knee or something, or maybe on my face. But I've worked at companies that have done both, right? There's definitely um, a different type of freedom that you get if you were to use something like Material Base, right? And that's like a white label system where you're using their framework, it's accessibility compliant, it's updated pretty regularly, it's open source, documentation is super easy to get to and ingest and add, and you can decorate it with your own branded experience. But sometimes those types of tools are limiting, right? So if you've ever looked at how Material sets up their token values and their semantics, it's not as flexible as we want, which actually does limit how you style things and how you classify. But you could do the opposite route where at Amazon, we love to make our own stuff because why? They love to make their own things, which is great because they have 100% control over what's being put into production. But it also means they make their own problems. Pretty much what Shane said. I think it depends on what your objective is, what your need is, the size of the company, the level of interest and investment, right? Doing operationally what is cost effective, time effective, and makes the most sense for longevity, right? Because you don't want to build a system that you can't update in 3 years without spending like $10 billion.
Yeah, that's true. Love it. It's a really good discussion. So we spoke about really hard problems today when it comes to unifying multiple product lines in huge organizations like Dropbox. We have some interesting highlights here where the compliance might be a good driver for the adoption and different strategies. I like, Katie, that you mentioned taxonomy, right? How we could unify the experiences, the patterns. Shane, you mentioned about the experiences, the visual consistencies that we can start. And we also spoke about the way how should we start with creating foundational design systems, or we can just start focusing on product specific, domain specific libraries, design systems from start. So those are all the interesting discussions. So I would like to thank Hetty and Shane for joining the session. And also thank you all for joining the session. Gemma, Jason, Zainab, Katie, friends, and others. So thank you very much for joining. If you would like to get the recording, make sure to register to the event within the event page so you will get the recording after that. Thank you very much and see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.